Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into some really compelling research that you shared with us. It's from a source called The Architecture of Collective Assent. And our mission for this deep dive is pretty specific. We really want to unpack why hitting those, truly high-level thresholds in
For
anything
like massive human endeavors.
exactly, or huge systemic changes, or even just reaching the absolute peak of your own personal calling. Why doing that alone is, well, fundamentally impossible. We're looking for the blueprint.
And right off the bat, we have to challenge what is probably the most foundational story of modern achievement.
Which is?
That deeply, deeply ingrained belief in the self-made individual. It's a great story. But when you actually start analyzing success at scale, when you look at achievements that really move the needle for society, that whole myth doesn't just, bend. It completely shatters.
It breaks.
It breaks. The central finding here, and this defines everything else, is that success at those higher levels, more responsibility, bigger impact, more complexity, it's inherently distributed. It's not personal.
Okay, so let's get into that. Because we're not just talking about, like, starting a small business from your garage.
No.
You're talking about missions that require just vast, complex coordination. So give us some of those big historical examples that really show this need for a collective infrastructure.
Well, think about the biggest leaps humanity has ever managed to take. I mean, space travel is the perfect example.
Right.
It was never just the astronaut in the capsule. It was, thousands of engineers, mission control specialists, designers.
All the people building consensus politically to even get it funded.
The manufacturers.
Yeah.
Everyone. All synchronized across an entire country, sometimes multiple countries.
Or what about deep sea exploration?
Yeah.
Where you need simultaneous expertise in metallurgy, biology, atmospheric science.
And emergency rescue.
And emergency rescue, all working in perfect concert. And you see it in big systemic shifts, too, right? Like creating a global safety standard or changing how a nation is governed. That takes painstaking distributed effort.
It does. And, the individual genius might have that first spark, that initial idea, but they can't build the launch pad, the guidance system, and the recovery team all by themselves.
No way.
And the source material really highlights that this effort needs specific types of support. We tend to focus only on the technical side of things.
The hardware, the money, the engineering.
Exactly. But the architecture is totally incomplete without the emotional and the social support.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Emotional support is about maintaining morale, keeping coherence when you're under just catastrophic pressure. Social support is about generating the public buy-in, the political will to keep believing in the mission, sometimes for decades.
So all three, technical, emotional, and social, they aren't just, like, nice-to-haves.
No, they're foundational requirements.
Yeah.
If one of those pillars is missing, the structure is unsound.
But wait, I have a question here. If success is so distributed, why do our systems, our culture, still pretend individual merit is enough? I mean, who gets the credit for that first singular vision? Isn't the leader still the linchpin?
That is the psychological trap, and it's the one the source material really pushes against. The vision might be singular, yes, but the risk and the achievement that follows, that's entirely collective. A vision is a spark, sure, a necessary spark. But the infrastructure is the engine that prevents a total flame out. I mean, look at Apollo 13.
Oh, perfect example.
The technical fix was genius, absolutely. But their survival depended just as much on the emotional regulation of mission control and the global social pressure that demanded their safe return. The success of that rescue was truly distributed.
That reframes the whole equation. So if individual merit just isn't enough for these huge missions, we have to change how we even think about reliance. And I think this brings us to one of the biggest ideas in the source material.
It does. Viewing community as essential infrastructure.
Right, not just a support group.
Exactly. We have to radically shift the paradigm. We have to stop seeing reliance as dependency, which, has this stigma of weakness.
Yeah, totally.
And start recognizing it for what it is, necessary infrastructure. Community support isn't charity. It's the structural grid required to carry the massive load of a high-impact mission.
And that reframing is just immense for anyone listening, for you, the learner. Because if I see asking for help as being dependent, I feel shame. But if I see needing support as building foundational infrastructure,
it becomes a strategic, non-negotiable step.
And that leads to this crucial shift in language the source insists on. Support isn't charity.
It's defined as synchronization.
Synchronization. I like that. It takes the transactional feel out of it. It's not about what I'm taking, but about how we align our efforts. The emphasis is on timing, alignment, and collective action.
And what's fascinating is how the source defines synchronization. It's described as, and I'm quoting here, a necessary condition for certain futures to unfold.
Wow, that's a heavy statement.
It's not hyperbole, though. Imagine a world-class orchestra. 100 brilliant musicians. Every single one has immense individual merit.
Sure.
But if they fail to synchronize, if the strings come in at the wrong time or the brass is off beat, the entire symphony just collapses. The failure isn't a lack of talent.
It's a lack of synchronization.
Precisely. And the implication is that without this, this technical, emotional, and social synchronicity, certain monumental missions, the system-changing ones, they just remain locked.
Inaccessible.
They're just sitting there dormant, waiting for that collective key to turn.
Waiting for the ignition switch.
So for you, the learner, if you're embarking on something massive, this is so critical. It means your mission might only activate when other people really participate and synchronize their efforts with yours.
And your most important job shifts. It moves from perfecting your individual creation to successfully coordinating the infrastructure around it.
Which brings us perfectly to the psychological side of all this. Because if synchronization is mandatory, then the individual has to completely change their inner game. Yes. Asking for help, needing that support. It stops being a sign of struggle.
It becomes what?
It becomes a rite of passage. It's a required step for anyone who wants to have a higher impact.
Yeah.
You have to prove you can navigate that transition to distributed success.
Okay, so that requires vulnerability, which is always scary. But the source identifies two key psychological shifts to manage this.
The first one is this shift from striving to allowing.
Striving to allowing. Unpack that.
Striving is an energy of resistance. It's pushing a boulder uphill, trying to control every single variable, usually in isolation. Allowing, on the other hand, is creating the space for support, for synchronicity, for that infrastructure to actually move toward you.
So you stop trying to force the outcome.
And you start inviting the conditions that allow the outcome to emerge through collaboration.
It feels like a move away from the ego of control. Because when you're leading a distributed effort, you can't control every single node. You just can't. You have to let others lead in their own areas.
You do.
But for someone who's built their whole identity on individual merit, how do they get over the psychological guilt of letting go of that responsibility?
That guilt is exactly why the rite of passage is mandatory. You have to prove you can lead a vulnerable system. And that connects directly to the second psychological shift, which is so practical, but often fatal if you miss it.
And that is?
It's nervous system regulation when your visibility increases.
The pressure.
The pressure.
What?
Distributed success means exponential visibility. Failures are public. Scrutiny is intense. The energy being directed at you is enormous. And if the leader's nervous system gets dysregulated,
They panic, they retreat, they lash out.
yes, and that instability radiates outwards and it jeopardizes the entire collective system.
So emotional stability isn't just a personal wellness thing. It's a non-negotiable part of the technical and social infrastructure. You have to be able to hold that collective pressure without shattering.
You absolutely have to. The system needs a stable control center. Think about high-stakes situations, an ER, a critical software deployment during a crisis. The leader who stays calm, who communicates clearly, who absorbs that initial shock.
They are the infrastructure.
They're the infrastructure that allows the intelligent collective response to happen. Without that regulation, the collective panics, synchronization breaks, mission fails.
That really grounds the concept. Okay, let's widen the lens a bit and talk about what this collective even is. The source pushes us beyond just the word community.
It does. It wants us to look at the nature of community intelligence.
Right, and there's a big difference between defining community as a crowd versus viewing it as an intelligence. A crowd is just mass, volatility.
Flash mob. Impulsive.
Exactly. But an intelligence implies synthesis, learning, awareness, a coordinated response.
Like an air traffic control system.
Yeah.
Thousands of inputs being synthesized constantly into coordinated, predictable action.
So if we're building an intelligent architecture, what are the forces that govern it?
The source identifies one force above all others, trust.
Trust.
But it describes trust not as a feeling or a virtue or, a soft skill. It's described as a measurable force.
Measurable force. Okay, now this is where we need to get practical for the listener. If trust is measurable, what does that actually look like on the ground? What are the metrics?
You can measure it by observing key behaviors, for example, the speed of decision-making.
Okay.
High-trust collectives make critical decisions much faster because they spend less time on redundancy checks, on oversight, on justifying every action. They're willing to deploy resources even with incomplete information because they trust the judgment of the person requesting it.
So there's less friction.
Way less friction. Another metric is recovery time after a minor failure.
Right.
In a low-trust system, a small failure kicks off a spiral of blame and defensiveness. The mission stalls.
Right.
In a high-trust system, failure is just seen as information.
Yeah.
It's absorbed quickly, and the system synchronizes to repair the break. Trust reduces the energy needed to operate the infrastructure.
So that raises a really important practical point for you, the listener. If the health of the collective trust is the engine, then achieving the highest level missions depends less on perfecting the technical solution.
And more on constantly maintaining the collective trust level.
So let's zoom out and summarize this deep dive into the architecture of collective assent. The biggest takeaway for you, the learner, seems to be that the highest levels of human achievement are, by definition, collaborative.
They are. They demand that robust infrastructure across all three pillars: technical, emotional, and social.
And the goal for high-level leadership completely shifts. It moves away from personal output.
And focuses entirely on synchronization. This idea of community not as a passive crowd, but as a necessary, intelligent architecture, that's what allows us to get beyond the individual ceiling we all eventually hit. If you want to build something truly massive, you have to build the collective structure first.
Absolutely. Which leaves us with a final thought to explore. If success is genuinely distributed, and if community really is an intelligence, we have to start thinking differently about how we measure progress. If the trust level, the nervous system regulation of the leadership, and the efficiency of the synchronization are the foundational forces enabling the mission, maybe those are the metrics we should be optimizing for from the very beginning, instead of just tallying up individual achievements at the end.
A whole new scorecard.
Something to mull over as you design your own architecture of assent. We'll see you on the next deep dive.